So hello to everyone who is joining us today for this ADAA educational webinar. So just to present myself, I am Karen Martinez. I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist at the University of Puerto Rico, and I am part of the ADAA Public Education Committee and also the co-chair of the Women's SIG. So if you are joining this webinar, you probably know a little bit about our website, but I just wanted to point out that we have a lot of information on our website, other webinars, educational information on anxiety, depression, how to get treatment, and specifically, I want to point out the feature of Find a Therapist, where you can find a list of therapists that are specialized in anxiety, depression, OCD, PTSD, and related disorders. And you can look for therapists by geographical location or by disorder. Also, I wanted to point out that on our website, you can sign up to our free online anxiety and depression peer-to-peer support groups. And we have both English and Spanish speaking community where you can join other people who are also dealing with anxiety and depression. So at the end, if you have any questions for the presenter or about the webinar or about our ADAA Public Education Committee, you can email your questions to webinars@adaa.org. So again, visit our website to learn more and to support ADAA's work. And today with us, we have Jenny Dipp, and she is a psychologist and the founder of the Renewed Freedom Center and Little Fingers Center in Los Angeles, California. She's also a clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at USC Keck School of Medicine, and she is ADAA member and a public education committee member. So today, she's going to be talking to us about digital separation anxiety, when kids can disconnect. So let me turn the presentation over to her so she can start. So thank you, Jenny, for being with us on this webinar.
Thank you so much for having me. So today we're going to talk about separation anxiety, not in your traditional sense, however, more of being separate from your digital devices and what to do with our kids today who are so overly connected with their digital devices. Let's first define what addiction is. So according to Merriam-Webster, an addiction is a compulsive, chronic, physiological, or psychological need for a habit-forming substance, behavior, or activity having harmful physical, psychological, or social effects. And there's a strong inclination to do, use, or indulge in this thing repeatedly. So this is a perfect definition of what we're seeing in a lot of our kids today, perhaps even in a lot of adults today. And what are some of the sources of these digital addiction? Well, there's the social media, texting, emails, seeing the news and entertainment on your digital devices, shopping, even work, if you're addicted to engaging in work on your devices, that can be a problem. Obviously, porn, dating, cyber relationships, gaming and gambling, these are all sources of digital addictions. Now, there isn't any official set of diagnostic criteria for digital addiction. However, the DSM-5 did propose an internet gaming disorder diagnosis. What are some of the symptoms of digital addiction? Well, you're losing track of time while you're on your devices. You're falling behind on your responsibilities and tasks because of the time you're spending. You're using your digital platforms in order to feel better, to escape from whatever is uncomfortable in real life. And then, of course, there are going to be feelings of anxiety, depression, emptiness when you're disconnected from your digital devices. And these are the withdrawal symptoms that is not dissimilar to people with substance use disorders. Um, there's the isolation and withdrawal from actual direct connection with friends and family members. And then there's the sense of guilt and defensiveness about your online activity or even the amount of time that you're spending online if you have friends or family members who are pointing it out to you. There are also physical symptoms, whether you believe it or not. However, I always say that our future generations are going to have a head that's forward and their arms are just going to be stuck up here because that's what everyone is doing these days. Nobody is really paying attention to anything outside of themselves because everyone's all doing this. So some of the physical symptoms, there's carpal tunnel from being on your devices for too long, headaches, backache, neck aches. There's weight gain or loss, dry or strained eyes, and definitely sleep disturbance, especially for those who are sleeping with their devices right next to them. And because we're just sitting and on our devices for so many hours in a day, it leads to reduced physical activity, which is going to also lead to weight gain and obesity. And when there is an attempt to decrease the use, when the attempt is not successful, that is definitely a sign of digital addiction.
So Jenny, what you're saying is that this is not like an official diagnosis that we can do, as clinicians, but that all of these symptoms together are being, put forth as maybe this is something we need to look into and be wary about.
Oh, yes. And there is more and more research that indicates that this is a problem with our current generation, that there are actually brain changes occurring that is shown from brain images that show there is a decrease in certain activities of the brain and increases in other areas of the brain. So I am going to talk about some of those changes that is reflective of a person with an addictive brain. However, if you're looking at this picture, I mean, this is pretty much what our generation is engaged in today. How many times do you walk by and there's a person with earbuds in or headphones on, and they're connected to multiple devices? And even if you're at the airport, people are just plugged in all the time. And this is viewed as the next greatest mental health crisis. So let's look at the trend of how people are actually addicted. If you're looking at this, the internet started around 1994. And since then, there has been more and more and more platforms that provide opportunities for addiction. And even if you're looking at this picture, you may not be able to see all of the words. However, if you look at the symbol, if you look at the icon, I bet many of you will recognize a lot of these, if not all of these. And that just shows how tied in we are to cyberspace. And if we look at the...
happens so fast. Yeah,
oh,
and that for the parents I work with, they're just overwhelmed because everything is evolving so fast that they just can't keep up.
That is definitely a concern I hear from many parents, that they have absolutely no idea what their kids are doing. And then, on the other side of it, there are so many apps these days that are geared for teens, so that parents are in the dark about what their teens are doing. So this poses a really dangerous space for especially the tweens and the younger kids who are really unfamiliar of the dangers that exist in cyberspace. And if you look at this diagram, it just goes to show how even in the last 2 decades, the increase in time that is spent on digital devices, on media consumption. So currently, we're spending between 80 to 90 hours a week. Now, there's only 168 hours in a week. And if there's only 168 hours and you're spending like even 85 hours a week on digital consumption, that's more than half of your of the time that exists in a day. And don't forget, you still have to account for the amount of time that you're not even awake. So of the waking time that you do have, a big proportion of it is being spent on media consumption. So that just goes to show where our time is being spent and how it's being utilized. So if you're looking at this, these are the common playgrounds for social media, and Facebook currently has the most users, where people are using it 51% of their days, followed by Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Here is another diagram that shows how much time people are spending per day on each of those social media apps. And this is just, this diagram just takes up a year. So this occurred from July 2017 to June 2018. So in a 12-month period, just the increased amount of time that people are using on each of these 3 platforms. So that is pretty significant. So let's talk about some of the different platforms, some of the different areas where people are connected to their digital devices. Well, your cell phone is your easiest digital device that you are connected to. There is, in fact, limitless connection on your cell phone, and more than 6 billion users worldwide are spending 3 to 4.7 hours a day just on the cell phone. So this doesn't include your laptop, your desktop, your digital pads, your TV screen. This is just on your cell phone. And 93% of 18 to 29-year-olds are using it out of boredom, which means that rather than using your imagination and flexing your critical and creative mind, you're basically turning to your digital device, your cell phone, because you're bored. 61% of these users check every 5 minutes, and I'm going to talk about what they're checking for in a little bit. And 74% check their phone before they sleep. 89% of these people use it for social activities. And then it creates a phantom vibration syndrome, which is basically that you're constantly feeling like, oh, wait, I think I feel that thing vibrating. And that is your phone that you're feeling that it's vibrating when it's actually not. And the problem is that your cell phone is always attached to you. So, I mean, I remember the days when we didn't have cell phones and we still survived. However, we are so dependent on our cell phones these days that a lot of people would become completely lost without their cell phones. And that is a dependence and addiction problem. A lot of people are replacing their loneliness with social media. So Facebook has 1.23 billion daily active users. That is a lot of people on Facebook every single day. Instagram has about 500 million users daily. YouTube, 30 million active users watching 250 million hours of content daily. Twitter, 126 million daily active users. And the problem is that there's a paradoxical effect here where the more you are on these social platforms, the more you're actually feeling lonely and isolation and with resulting anxiety and depression. And the problem with a lot of these platforms is that they are designed to be addictive. They're designed to get users to click and click and click, because the more you're clicking on certain links, the more that generates a profit for some of the advertisers. So we are now in a generation where we can't tolerate boredom, and therefore we turn directly into the entertainment that we get from our devices. So Netflix has more than 200 million users worldwide, consuming more than 10 billion hours in a given month. 61% binge watch regularly. Back in the day, you had to wait for the next episode and wait for the next episode. Well, Netflix figured out that, if they just put everything out there at one time, they can get people to stay on Netflix longer. 97% of 2 to 17-year-olds, 2 to 17-year-olds play video games. 5% of gamers are addicted, and again, they're designed to be addictive. So why is digital media designed to be addictive? Like I said earlier, the more people click on these links that are associated with some of these platforms, the more they produce income for, or they generate profit for a lot of the branding companies. Back in the day, you can have one brand that you're using to market for a whole year, and today that is not going to suffice because you're in so much competition with other brands. So, for example, Nike and Adidas, they would have to keep producing and changing their brand to keep people interested and clicking. So because of the competitive nature of the whole marketing reality of these companies, more and more links are needed to get more and more people clicking on them and addicted. What are some of the effects of digital addiction? Well, there's the FOMO, which is fear of missing out anxiety. So therefore, it keeps you addicted. It keeps you attached to your devices and to the news and to whatever is happening in social media, because you fear you're going to miss out on some important thing or life event that is portrayed. People are addicted to displaying the perfect life that they have, the perfect selfie. We're all into that selfie mode, that me, look at me phase, and that is actually increasing anxiety and depression for a lot of people. There is the fear of being forgotten, agoraphobia, where you want to contribute to your legacy by producing things online, by posting things on social media. And it's true, even when the person is no longer here on earth with us and they've passed, their social media is still present, and we can still go back to their social media to remember them. And again, we talked about the phantom vibration syndrome, where you're constantly feeling like, you're getting pings and you're getting messages, incoming notifications. So what happens to your brain when you are addicted? Well, it's basically your phone is kind of like cocaine. Your phone is a dopamine pump. And there is a high correlation between technology use and mental health struggles. So getting the likes and the followers, playing video games, scrolling through Snapchat, all activates the reward system that releases dopamine. And when there are constant notifications, vibrations, alert on your digital devices, it compels you to check, which triggers the same neural pathways that alert us to imminent danger. So in the past, when we have had imminent danger, so for example, fire alarm that would trigger us to be alert, we now feel the same, we now have the same occurrence in our brains from the notifications of our phones. They produce the same activity in our brain. Research also demonstrates that there's a structural and functional change in the prefrontal cortex of people with digital addiction that is similar with those with substance addiction. So some of those changes include less activation in the prefrontal cortex, that is involved in a lot of the voluntary control that you have. And then there's also lower gray matter density in the brain. So there is a vicious cycle of addiction. And as we talked about earlier, addiction is when a behavior or a substance has an irresistible quality served to achieve pleasure. And the relief of discomfort is what dominates the motivation of the person to continue using the substance or engaging in the behavior. So, for example, gambling, overeating, television compulsion, internet addiction, all of these people are addicted in order to experience the release of discomfort and the increase in pleasure. And the more they engage in the behavior, the more they experience, the more they have the same experiences. Both behavioral addiction as well as substance use addiction have compulsive behaviors. They lack control. They have this urge and craving before they engage in the behavior. And then there's a relief, the sense of feeling after engaging in the behavior. And then when they aren't using the device or the substance, there's that withdrawal symptoms such as anxiety, depression. The behavior or the motivation to check social media, text, emails are all motivated by the dopamine surge that results when you are engaging in the activity. So every time you every time you are about to check your email or check for text, there's that increase in dopamine that gives you that mood altering pleasure feeling. And of course, when you go and check and there's nothing, then it results in that withdrawal symptom of feeling loss and anxiety and depression. So what I want to talk about is the difference between impulsivity and compulsivity, because I think a lot of people confuse this as a compulsive behavior. And it's really much more of an impulsive behavior. And the reason being is that, even though both compulsive and impulsive behavior have an inability to control or delay the behavior, the purpose is different. So for example, in compulsivity, the repetitive behaviors are negatively reinforced. So what does that mean? That means that the behaviors you are engaged in order to gain some sort of relief or discomfort. Whereas in impulsivity, the behaviors are positively reinforced because it actually brings about pleasure. In compulsivity, it's ego dystonic, which means that I'm engaging in this behavior. So for example, in obsessive compulsive disorder, I'm engaging in hand washing, not because hand washing fits within my value system, however, because hand washing gives me that sense of relief from fear of being contaminated. Whereas in impulsivity, it's ego syntonic, which means that hand washing or porn addiction or substance use addiction fits with my belief system that, I don't think there's anything wrong with this. In compulsivity, it's risk avoidance. I am trying to avoid certain threats and dangers, whereas in impulsivity, it is risk seeking. Again, we talk about how the differences in the behaviors, one is to decrease discomfort, the other is to increase pleasure. But more importantly, there's a difference in your brain activity, where in the compulsivity camp, there's actually an increase in your frontal lobe activity, and in the impulsivity group, there's a decrease in frontal lobe activity as well as serotonergic activity. So what does this all mean? Well, there's a negative reinforcement cycle for internet addiction. So you can look at this as someone who is experiencing OCD, who is experiencing anxiety. There is a negative reinforcement cycle, and I think the thing about addiction that is so daunting is that not only is it negatively reinforced, it's also positively reinforced. So it actually takes into both the impulsivity and compulsivity that we were looking at just now. So back to this cycle, the fear is that you won't be liked, that you won't get any followers, that you won't be connected to other people, that people won't respond to you. And therefore, when you have these certain fears, it's going to generate a lot of discomfort, anxiety, distress, depression, feelings of loneliness and emptiness. And because we live in a society where we dislike feeling uncomfortable, we're going to engage in these compulsions or addictive behaviors, such as checking your screens for texts and emails and responses, posting on social media to keep getting likes and followers. And then whenever you engage in these compulsive behaviors, you get a sense of relief. But that doesn't mean that the fear is no longer existent. In fact, it only serves to reinforce the fear that you need to keep engaging in these behaviors to keep getting liked, followed, and being connected to others out there. And for family members, this can be a bit overwhelming, to say the least, because if you have a teen who is addicted to their digital device and they're going to be expressing anxiety, distress, anger, right here when they're experiencing the fear of missing out, then they're going to be a bit resentful if you're asking them to decrease the amount of time that they're spending or limiting the use that they have on these digital devices. So family members can feel frustration, can feel guilt, can feel anger. However, that only leads to family members to give in, right? If you're feeling frustrated, guilt, anger, you might even feel bad that your child has a point that they're missing out when all of their friends are on social media, then you might give in and you might accommodate their request to stay on a little bit longer, another hour. However, that only leads the child to be even more addicted, because then it's giving them permission to continue utilizing the device and relying and depending on the device. And that is the message that we're sending to our kids when we're saying, okay, you can have another hour. So what ends up happening is that the child, experiences relief, I get another hour, and then the family members get peace. And, I don't know how often do we see kids, we see kids who are on digital devices. We see kids on digital devices in restaurants. We see them at home. We see digital devices babysitting our kids today. And, that is a huge problem because of the negative effects that it does have on the child. So what's happening? What are some of the effects? Well, it is certainly creating a lot of narcissism in this privileged, narcissistic attitude in a lot of our kids. So there's a difference between being connected and being addicted. Being connected means that you have some control over what type of social media platforms your kids are on, how much time that they're spending on it, that they're not spending more time than they need to be on it. Versus addiction means that there's absolutely no control, that the child is completely reliant and in need to be connected. And, this creates that narcissistic me syndrome where everything is about you now. It's about your selfies and what you're posting about your life. And this can be actually dangerous because there are so many kids today who are posting anything and everything about themselves on the internet that have a lot of negative repercussions later. I mean, even college admissions counselors can be looking through it, and even later on um, when they're seeking employment, employers as well as college admissions counselors can be looking at your child's social media postings to kind of get a sense of who they are in their private lives, even though it's not private at all. And I don't think kids realize this. And there are also so many predators out there that can be using your child's post to find out information about them that it really is private information. And, all of this is for the purpose of gaining likes and followers, which then becomes your child's sense of confidence and self-esteem, even though it's external rather than internal. So it's almost like my sense of self, my value as a person is based on how many likes and followers I get rather than who I am as a person. Which, if we start down that path, then it's really hard to revert that and help the teenager or the adolescent young adult to find confidence and self-esteem within themselves rather than based on the number of likes and followers that they have. And because there's that instant gratification with emails, texts, even dating apps today, I mean, goodness, Tinder and Grindr, you swipe left and swipe right to get matched. There's that sense that things need to happen immediately. So what does it do with the person's attention span? Well, it decreases the person's attention span. It decreases the person's patience and tolerance. So we all know that with the internet, it creates a lot of attention deficit. So that is also really important to consider when you have a child who's using technology. So is it addiction or just using too much tech? Well, that depends on your response to some of these questions. Is your child checking their phone every few minutes for a text notification or email? Do they become anxious when they don't get an immediate response? Is their self-esteem and confidence based on the number of likes, followers, and friends that they have? Are they able to sit alone in public without hiding their faces in their phone? Or is every free moment that they have, they're holding their phones, they're glued to their homes, to their phones? Do they avoid direct personal connections in favor of social media connections to avoid taking those emotional risks? And is the screen a safety blanket that gives them that false sense of relief and comfort? If the screen becomes a safe escape from real life problems, then that is a problem. That can definitely lead to addiction in order to escape your real life. If your child is literally attached to a digital device and using it exclusively for social connection and entertainment, it can lead to deficient social skills and anxiety when they're having to connect to the real world. If your child is constantly seeking pings and notifications of positive reinforcement, and they're depending on the likes and followers to feel good about themselves, that is a huge problem. If your child is only able to feel good from the use of digital devices, and those constant messages really are interruptions and distractions that take away their focus from, I don't know, doing homework, that is a problem. And also, if your child is involved in cyberbullying, that is another indicator of a problem. So remember, we talked about some of the dangers that exist in cyberspace, and cyberbullying is one of those huge dangers that exist today. So as a parent, what can you do about it? Well, you have to encourage your child to connect in person and build meaningful relationships face to face. And the most important thing is that you, as a parent, are modeling it yourself, that you're also preferring to connect and build meaningful relationships rather than texting. If you are texting your child instead of going to their room and talking to them, then that is an indicator of what you're modeling for your child. So you also want to be the one to demonstrate what does it mean to have meaningful relationships. Just as you don't want to be comparing yourself on social media to other people, you also don't want to be comparing your child to other children on social media. Or if your child comes to you and tells you that they feel bad because their life doesn't look as good on whatever social media they're on compared to their friends, then it's important for you to be able to help them understand that, the whole purpose of social media is to show your best light, not your real life. And if you can demonstrate it yourself, then you're setting the example for your children. Help your children understanding what is the difference between a real connection versus a connection that is through social media. So if your child is on social media and they have a ton of followers who are constantly giving them praise, even though they have all of those praise and followers and likes, the totality of it cannot equal the same as a real connection, a face-to-face friend who is going to be your support network. You have to be able to set limits with your kids in terms of how much time they're allowed to be plugged in, how much time they're allowed to be on social media or on any specific types of screen. And again, that means that you have to be an example for that as well. So, in my household, there are certain times where digital devices are not permitted. So the dinner time is a time when digital devices is not permitted. And the time before bed, the hour before bed, that is the time to be calming down and not be aroused by digital devices. You want to help your children to be physically active, and whether it's going outside and playing at the playground or, even being at home and playing a board game. How many of us still do that today? Playing a board game with your kids rather than just sitting in front of the TV watching a movie. That is really important because that allows for active interaction. You want to hide your own phone for a few hours, and if you feel a strong urge to check, even when your phone isn't right next to you, then it's important to unplug, because that is an indicator of what you are demonstrating to your children. If you're able to demonstrate and set a good example that, hey, I don't need to be with my phone, I'm just going to leave my phone in a different room of the house, and you can tolerate that, then that is the example that you're setting for your kids. And I always recommend digital detoxing weekly, because it can actually be very liberating if you're not attached to your phone 24/7. If you're constantly attached and other people expect you to respond immediately, then then you get that sense of anxiety and that urge to have to keep checking. However, if you're setting the boundary, hey, on Sundays, I'm not on my device. I always tell my staff, on weekends I am not reachable because I'm with my family. So if you can set that example for your children, then they will follow that example as well. And if you're able to detox digitally, you're lowering your own stress levels, you're also giving room for more meaningful interactions with your children. So I think those are some very important tips and tools. And, if anything else, I would also say it's really important to be turning your phone off at night when you're sleeping, and, even putting it in airplane mode when you're sleeping, because a lot of people, it's so surprising that a lot of people will sleep with their phone underneath their pillows, and they're not considering all the radiation that's coming from their phones. That can have huge negative effects to their physical health. So even putting your phone in airplane mode at night will be a huge contributor to decreasing your stress levels.
Thank you, Jenny. These has been great tips for everyone, parents, but also for adults, definitely. So
Yes.
a question that I get asked a lot, especially by parents, is, schools today, they basically want kids to have their phones. They need to check their homeworks, through online portals, books that are online. They need to send homeworks by email. So how, what recommendations would you have in terms of creating that balance between this being a work tool versus addiction?
I am shaking my head as I'm hearing that question, because I think, yes, I hear that question a lot, and I think it's just awful that a lot of our schools today are basically promoting the addiction to the internet. However, that's to say again, it's about finding balance. So for those of us who are, who rely on emails and, for example, like this webinar for work, we have to help our children be able to define certain times of the day that they are expected to go on their academic portals to stay on top of their tasks and assignments. However, that doesn't mean that they're going to be on it throughout the entire night. So there has to be an end period to that.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I know this is going to be a great webinar in terms of helping a lot of people out there. And again, thank you for all of you who joined the webinar. I hope this has been helpful. And like we said at the beginning, there are a lot of other resources at www.adaa.org. So please make sure to go there, see other webinars, get all our information. And thank you again, Jenny.
Thanks so much.